It started with just a sound, a hollow, empty click carried on a breeze that wasn't there. A sound that burrowed deep into my mind and refused to leave. A sound that announced the presence of something ancient and utterly, terrifyingly wrong in the quiet heart of the Allegheny National Forest. Ilara's face was usually a canvas of controlled calm, a necessity in her high-stakes career. But as our old SUV crunched onto the gravel of the Allegheny National Forest's parking area, a genuine, unburdened smile broke through. 4 hours of driving from the city, the last 90 minutes punctuated by Bear's low, anxious whines from the back seat, and we had finally arrived. The instant I killed the engine, the sudden silence was profound, only broken by the frantic scrabbling of Bear's paws against the rear window. "Someone's a bit eager," I chuckled, leaning over to unlatch his door. Ilara was already opening the tailgate, a gust of cool, pine-scented air washing over us. Bear shot out, a blur of golden fur and wagging tail, nose to the ground, inhaling the rich scent of damp earth and decaying pine needles. He'd been cooped up too long, just like us. We dreamt of this trip for months, 3 days of glorious, absolute isolation. No buzzing of cell service, no infuriating email alerts, no emergency calls from Ilara's hospital demanding her presence, no last-minute, soul-crushing client revisions for me. Just us, the wilderness, and the quiet. "Let's get a move on before the sun starts dipping too low," Ilara urged, her backpack already slung over her shoulder, a picture of efficient readiness. I grabbed Bear's leash, the tent, and the larger of our 2 coolers, while Ilara methodically organized the smaller food provisions, double-checking the inventory. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of ancient trees, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air, crisp and cool, carried that intoxicating blend of pine and damp soil, a primal scent that instantly reminded me how starved I was for the outdoors. My eyes, usually strained from staring at computer screens for too long, already felt a subtle relief. "Gone over the trail map again, just to be sure," I said, slinging my own pack onto my shoulders, feeling the familiar weight settle. "The path gets pretty faint about a mile in, but it should lead us straight to a perfect clearing. I marked it on the GPS too, just in case." Ilara gave me a confident nod, cinching her pack straps tighter, her expression mirroring my own anticipation. "Lead the way, wilderness man. Bear, come on." With Bear straining eagerly against his leash, his whole body quivering with excitement, we plunged onto the narrow, winding trail that snaked deeper into the ancient woods. The path was clearly defined at first, marked by occasional weathered wooden posts. But as we pushed further, the distinct trail began to fade, slowly giving way to a less obvious route. 2 miles in, the trail was barely more than a subtle depression in the leaf litter, a mere suggestion between the towering trees. The forest grew thicker, the light dimmer, and the silence deepened, broken only by the crunch of our boots and the soft rustle of leaves. "Are you sure we're not going to get ourselves hopelessly lost out here?" Ilara asked, pushing aside a low-hanging branch, a hint of concern in her voice. "Trust me," I replied, even as I instinctively reached into my pocket to double-check the small, reliable compass I'd brought. Its needle spun briefly before settling, pointing us north. "The clearing should be just ahead, right where I marked it. We're almost there." Just 5 minutes later, the dense wall of trees began to thin, and then, as if by magic, they opened up to reveal precisely what I had been envisioning for weeks. A wide, flat expanse of earth, bordered on all sides by magnificent, towering pines. There was ample space for our 4-person tent, a generous area for a roaring campfire, and even room to stretch out. Previous hikers, or perhaps a thoughtful park service, had already arranged a perfect circle of stones near the center, clearly a designated fire pit. "Perfect," Ilara breathed, dropping her pack with a soft thud and rolling her shoulders, loosening the strain of the hike. Bear, ever the explorer, immediately began a meticulous inspection of the clearing, nose to the ground, circling every inch of our new temporary home, a low, inquisitive rumble occasionally vibrating in his chest. "See," I said, setting down our gear, a smug satisfaction warming me. "I told you this would be worth it, complete, utter isolation." We slipped effortlessly into our practiced camping rhythm. I took charge of setting up the tent, snapping the aluminum poles together with satisfying clicks, while Ilara efficiently organized our food supplies, dividing them into bear-resistant dry sacks and placing the cooler strategically. The 4-person tent was, by conventional standards, overkill for 2 people and a dog, but we both cherished the luxury of extra space, especially for our gear. I drove the stakes firmly into the softened earth, remembering that disastrous trip to Michigan years ago when a midnight rainstorm had nearly collapsed our poorly secured shelter, soaking everything. Lessons learned, stoves ready for action, Alara called out, her voice bright, as I hammered in the last stake. She'd already assembled our compact camping stove on a flat, smooth rock, the familiar hiss of heating water for tea already filling the air. By the time we had the sleeping bags unrolled and zipped together inside the tent, creating one large, cozy nest, and a generous pile of firewood collected, the sun was beginning its slow, majestic descent toward the western horizon. I carefully built a fire in the stone circle, arranging kindling and larger logs, coaxing the first tendrils of smoke, while Alara pulled out our lightweight camp chairs. "This is absolutely perfect, Caleb," Alara said, settling into her chair with a sigh of deep contentment as the flames grew stronger, casting flickering shadows on her face. God, I needed this so badly. The past month at the hospital had been brutal for her. Undeniable understaffing had led to grueling, extended shifts, and a particularly nasty wave of sick children had left her emotionally drained, her empathy stretched thin. My own job had morphed into a relentless nightmare of impossible deadlines, compounded by a demanding client who seemed utterly incapable of making up his mind about what he wanted, shifting his vision daily. Bear flopped down between our chairs, a contented sigh escaping him, his eyes half closed in relaxation, yet his ears remained perpetually alert, occasionally twitching at distant rustles and calls from the deepening forest. "Hungry?" I asked, reaching for the cooler, already imagining the sizzle of sausages over the open flame. "Starving," Alara replied, her voice light with anticipation. I laid out the metal skewers and unwrapped the package of sausages, while Alara uncorked a bottle of a surprisingly decent, inexpensive wine we'd packed. The simple act of cooking over an open fire, of feeling the heat on my face and smelling the smoke, felt like a return to something essential, something profoundly missing from our cramped apartment in the city. "Too disconnecting," Alara said, raising her plastic camping cup of wine, the firelight glinting in its contents. "To remembering what truly matters," I replied, touching my cup to hers with a gentle clink. The sausages sizzled, fat dripping into the flames and causing sporadic, theatrical flare-ups. Bear's eyes, bright and hopeful, followed every movement of the food, his nose twitching almost imperceptibly. "Don't even think about it, buddy," I warned him, though I knew with absolute certainty that we'd both end up slipping him pieces when we thought the other wasn't looking. We ate as darkness fully enveloped us, the fire casting our small circle in a warm, inviting glow, while the vast, ancient forest beyond faded into an impenetrable black. After dinner, Alara pulled out a bag of marshmallows, and we roasted them to that perfect, golden-brown perfection, sticky and sweet. "Look up," I said, pointing through a natural gap in the towering trees directly above us. The night sky was ablaze with stars, thousands more than we could ever hope to glimpse from the light-polluted haze of the city. The longer we looked, the more appeared, as if the darkness was gradually, majestically revealing its deepest secrets, one pinprick of light at a time. "That's Cassiopeia," I said, tracing the distinctive W-shaped pattern with my finger. "And just over there, that's the Big Dipper, leading to the North Star." "Show off," Alara said, but she squeezed my hand as she said it, a soft smile on her lips. "We really, truly should do this more often," she added after a quiet moment, her voice thoughtful. "I completely forgot how utterly quiet it is out here." The forest wasn't actually quiet, not truly. It was filled with sounds, but they were natural ones. The soft, ethereal whisper of wind rustling through pine needles, the lonely hoot of an owl somewhere in the distant darkness, the comforting, occasional snap and pop of our fire. What was truly missing was the oppressive, constant background noise of the city, the incessant hum of traffic, the piercing wail of sirens, the drone of neighbors' air conditioners, the sterile whir of electronics. "We could make it a monthly thing," I suggested, emboldened by the moment. "Different parks each time, explore a new corner of the country." "I'd really like that, Caleb," Alara said, leaning her head onto my shoulder, her warmth a comfort against the cooling night air. We sat like that for nearly an hour, bathed in the soft glow of the dying fire, talking not about work or stress, but about places we wanted to visit, small, funny things that had happened, ambitious plans for the rest of the year, all the conversations we were usually too tired or too busy to have as midnight approached. The fire burned down to glowing, pulsing embers, sending lazy tendrils of smoke upward into the stardusted sky. Bear had been asleep for a while, a soft, rumbling snore escaping him, but his ears still twitched occasionally in response to unseen forest sounds. "Ready for bed, my love?" I asked, noticing Alara trying unsuccessfully to hide a wide yawn. She nodded, her eyes heavy-lidded. We carefully, meticulously extinguished the fire, making absolutely certain every single ember was out, dousing it repeatedly with water until it was nothing but cool ash and char. Only then did we head into the tent. Bear, ever loyal, followed us inside, circling 3 times in his usual ritual before finally settling at the foot of our sleeping bags, a warm, furry weight against our feet. The inside of the tent was cozy, a small, insulated cocoon against the vast darkness of the forest. Our sleeping bags, zipped together, formed one large, welcoming surface. Alara curled against me, her body warm and familiar, her breathing quickly becoming slow and steady, a comforting rhythm in the quiet. Through the mesh window of the tent, I could see patches of the star-filled sky glimpsed between the silhouetted branches of the pines. I lay there, listening to the gentle sounds around us. The soft, continuous whisper of wind through the pines, Alara's rhythmic breathing, Bear's occasional, deep sighs of contentment. The ground felt hard beneath our sleeping pads, a stark contrast to our soft bed at home, but somehow I still felt more comfortable, more at peace than I had in weeks. My shoulders and neck, usually perpetually knotted with tension, finally began to relax as I drifted towards sleep. I tried to mentally bottle this peaceful feeling, to remember it, for when I would inevitably be back at my stressful job, facing the relentless demands of the city. The last thought that truly registered before sleep claimed me was how profoundly thankful I was to be here, far, far away from all the demands, the deadlines, and the crushing weight of modern life. I fell asleep to the symphony of the forest night, a lullaby of crickets and unseen rustles, utterly oblivious that something unwelcome, something utterly unnatural, would soon shatter this perfect quiet. I woke abruptly at 3:00 a.m. in the profound darkness of our tent. Something felt profoundly, inherently wrong. It wasn't just the usual discomfort of sleeping on the hard ground or the unfamiliar chorus of forest sounds. It was something else, an unsettling anomaly I couldn't quite place, a prickle of unease on my skin that transcended mere discomfort. I lay absolutely still for a long moment, my senses straining, trying to identify precisely what had dragged me from the depths of sleep. Alara breathed steadily beside me, one arm thrown across her face, lost in her own dreams. Bear, usually a restless sleeper, was eerily still at the foot of the bed. Then I noticed it. I could distinctly hear the wind moving through the pine trees above us, that gentle, continuous whisper and the soft creak of branches swaying. But the walls of our tent, the thin nylon fabric, were completely, unnervingly still. The material wasn't moving at all, not even a tremble. I sat up slowly, carefully, not wanting to disturb Alara. The nylon walls of the tent should have been rippling, at least a little, with any breeze strong enough to set the towering pines in motion. This was a complete, inexplicable stillness at ground level, an unnatural pocket of calm. I reached for my flashlight, finding it exactly where I'd left it beside my pillow, its cool metal casing a comfort in the dark. With one last, lingering look at Alara's peacefully sleeping face, I unzipped the tent door, moving with excruciating slowness, making as little sound as possible. I slipped outside, pulling the zipper down most of the way, but leaving it ajar just enough for Bear to follow if he chose. The night air outside was strangely heavy. Just as inside the tent, I could clearly hear the wind sighing through the upper branches of the trees above, a soft, mournful sound. But the air around me at ground level was absolutely, utterly still. There wasn't even the slightest, most imperceptible breeze on my skin. I looked up to confirm what my ears were telling me. Yes, the upper reaches of the pines were definitely swaying and rustling against the velvet expanse of the night sky, their dark silhouettes shifting. But down here where I stood, the air was stagnant, unmoving. Our campfire, which I had so meticulously doused, had gone out completely, without even the smallest, most lingering glow in the ashes. It was just a cold, black circle of stone and ash-eye swept my flashlight beam across our small clearing. Everything appeared perfectly normal, frozen in place. Our camp chairs, the neat stack of firewood, our cooler. Then a soft whine escaped from the tent, and Bear's nose nudged through the partly open door. He squeezed out to join me, but something was profoundly off about him. Instead of his usual relaxed, inquisitive stance, the hair on his back was bristling, standing rigid from his shoulders to his tail, which was held low and stiff, not wagging. His body was tense, coiled. He peered intently into the impenetrable darkness beyond our camp, ears pointed sharply forward, a low, guttural growl beginning to build deep in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the oppressive quiet, following his unblinking gaze with my flashlight beam. The powerful light caught only trees, dense underbrush, and the intricate network of shadows they cast. Nothing unusual, nothing I could discern. Then I heard it click, click. Click. The sound came from somewhere deep in the trees, on the far side of our clearing, a hollow, utterly alien clicking noise. It was like someone tapping a stick against wood, yes, but with a weird, empty, resonant quality, a peculiar echo that didn't sound like anything organic, anything natural, anything I had ever heard come from the woods before. It was mechanical, yet not. Rhythmic, yet not. Click, click, pause, click, click. Click. Bear pressed hard against my leg, his low growl deepening, vibrating through my jeans. I stood absolutely still, my heart thumping against my ribs, straining to pinpoint the source of the sound with my ears. It moved. It changed position, shifting through the dense trees beyond our clearing, slowly circling our campsite at a distance. The rhythm was maddeningly irregular, starting and stopping without any discernible pattern I could figure out, making it impossible to predict. "Hello," I called out, not too loudly. I didn't want to wake Alara if this turned out to be nothing more than a weirdly acoustic owl or some bizarre, nocturnal animal. "Someone there." The clicking stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than before, somehow more suffocating. I waited, my flashlight beam cutting a path into the dark, pointing toward where I'd last heard the sound. Nothing moved, no sound came. The forest had gone completely, unnervingly quiet. "Hello," I tried again, taking a few hesitant steps toward the tree line, my hand tightening on the flashlight. Bear didn't follow. Instead, he backed up toward the tent entrance, his low growl turning into a worried, almost desperate whine. I stopped. A wave of profound nervousness washed over me. I had no weapon, nothing but my small pocket knife, tucked uselessly away in my backpack inside the tent. And something about how Bear was acting, his instinctual, primal fear, gave me the deepest, most unsettling creeps. Just as I made the decision to retreat back into the perceived safety of the tent, the clicking started again. This time it came from a completely different direction than before, from the opposite side of the clearing. Click. Click, click, click. I spun around fast, heart hammering, pointing my flashlight toward the new noise. Again, I saw nothing but the dense, impenetrable wall of trees and the yawning darkness beyond. My rational mind screamed for an explanation, but my gut screamed danger. Pure, unadulterated danger. I went back to the tent, my movements quick and decisive, and Bear, sensing my urgency, quickly ducked inside. I followed, zipping the door closed behind us, the flimsy nylon feeling like no barrier at all. Ilara was still sound asleep, oblivious. I sat cross-legged on my sleeping bag, my body rigid, listening. The clicking continued outside, moving around our campsite in a wide, slow circle. Sometimes, unnervingly, it seemed to come from different places at once, a cacophony of hollow taps, though that might have been echoes bouncing around in the thick, still air of the dark forest. For 2 long, agonizing hours, I stayed awake, utterly rigid, trying to follow the sounds as they moved through the woods around us, never quite settling in one spot. Bear stayed alert beside me, a warm, reassuring weight, sometimes growling softly, a low, continuous rumble, when the clicking came from a new, closer spot. His unwavering focus on the tent entrance was more terrifying than comforting around 5 o'clock a.m. As the sky began to show the faintest hint of lighter gray in the east, the clicking finally began to fade. The time between each distinct sound grew longer, the clicks themselves sounded farther away, more muffled, until they stopped completely. The silence returned, but this time it felt less oppressive, less charged with unseen menace. Only then did I notice the tent fabric moving slightly, a soft rippling as a gentle, natural breeze finally touched our campsite. Whatever weird, unnatural stillness had been holding the air captive around us was gone, replaced by the normal, waking breath of the forest. I must have fallen asleep eventually, a profound exhaustion finally claiming me. The next thing I knew, warm sunlight was filtering through the tent mesh, casting dappled patterns on the floor, and Alara was stirring beside me, slowly waking up. Morning, she murmured, stretching her arms above her head, a picture of untroubled repose. How'd you sleep, love? Not great, I admitted, rubbing my eyes, feeling the grit of exhaustion behind them. I woke up around 3 o'clock and couldn't get back to sleep. Alara sat up, pushing a cascade of dark hair from her face, her brows furrowed slightly. Why? What happened? I recounted the events of the early morning. The weird, unmoving air at ground level despite the wind in the treetops, and the strange, hollow clicking sounds that had circled our camp for hours. As I spoke, Alara's expression subtly shifted, morphing from concern to mild, almost gentle amusement. Sounds like you had quite the vivid dream, my love, she said, patting my arm, her touch warm and reassuring, but utterly dismissive of my fear. Or maybe you just heard a woodpecker or some other nocturnal animal. The forest can play tricks on your ears when you're half asleep. It wasn't a dream, I insisted, a touch of desperation in my voice. And it definitely wasn't a woodpecker. It was too structured, too empty. And Bear heard it too. He was growling and everything. He was terrified. Alara glanced at Bear, who had finally relaxed enough to curl up at our feet, his tail thumping softly against the sleeping bag. Well, he seems perfectly fine now, she said with a shrug, already unzipping the tent door. I'm going to grab the water for coffee. My head is already demanding caffeine. I watched her step outside, casual and unconcerned, utterly oblivious to the gnawing unease that still gripped me. Maybe she was right. Maybe my stressed-out, overworked brain had conjured strange, menacing meanings from perfectly normal forest sounds. Maybe the unnatural stillness had been some weird, isolated weather phenomenon. But as we prepared breakfast outside, the smell of sizzling bacon filling the crisp morning air, I noticed something that Alara didn't. Bear wouldn't roam freely as he had yesterday, exploring every scent and rustle. Instead, he stayed close to our legs, often brushing against them, his eyes repeatedly returning to the tree line with an unusual, unwavering intensity. I found myself doing the same, constantly glancing at the dark edge of the forest as I flipped pancakes on our small camp stove. These look amazing, Caleb, Alara said, holding out her plate, her smile bright and untroubled. I slid a pancake onto it, forcing a smile onto my own face. Nothing like breakfast outdoors, right? She nodded, already taking a bite, lost in the simple pleasure. I kept cooking, trying to push away the persistent nervousness. It was a beautiful morning, undeniably so. Birds sang a cheerful chorus in the branches, sunlight streamed through the trees in golden shafts, and the air was fresh and cool. But I couldn't shake the memory of those hollow clicks in the darkness, or the way they'd stopped whenever I'd called out, as if whatever made them was watching me, listening, responding to my movements with an eerie intelligence. I served myself the last pancake and sat beside Alara, keeping Bear's warm body a comforting weight between us. So what's the plan for today? Alara asked, finishing her breakfast with a contented sigh. I thought we could hike to that lake I read about, I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. It's supposed to be about an hour from here, a pretty easy trek. Sounds perfect, she said, beaming. I nodded, not mentioning that I'd be slipping my hunting knife into my pocket before we left, or that I'd be watching Bear even more carefully than usual. If Alara thought I was being paranoid, so be it. Better paranoid than unprepared if those clicking sounds decided to come back. I tried to focus on the trail ahead as we hiked toward the lake, but my mind kept replaying those unsettling clicking sounds from the night before, their strange rhythm echoing in my memory. Alara walked slightly ahead, her usual cheerful self, pointing out interesting plants and the occasional colorful bird, utterly without a care in the world. Bear, normally eager to dash ahead and explore every scent, every rustle, stayed unusually close to my legs, his golden fur occasionally brushing against my jeans. Every now and then he would glance back toward our campsite, his eyes narrowed, a suspicious tension in his posture. This is the perfect day for swimming, wouldn't you say? Alara asked, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead as we crested a small hill. The morning had warmed quickly, the sun bright and strong overhead, filtering in shafts through gaps in the tree canopy. I bet the water will feel absolutely amazing right about now. Yeah, I agreed, trying to match her enthusiasm, even as my hand kept brushing against the reassuring, cool hilt of the hunting knife I'd slipped into my pocket before we left. I hadn't told Alara I was carrying it. The trail narrowed as we began our descent toward the lake, forcing us to walk single file. Bear stuck close behind me, his usual playful energy replaced by a watchful vigilance. Instead of sniffing around like he usually did, his head was up, constantly scanning the woods around us, his ears swiveling. After about an hour of hiking, the trees suddenly opened up to reveal the lake, a surprisingly large, clear body of water, nestled serenely in a small valley. Smooth, flat rocks lined our side of the shore, and thick, ancient forest came right up to the water's edge on the opposite side. "It's beautiful, Caleb," Alara breathed, already unlacing her hiking boots, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Come on, last one in is cooking dinner tonight." I smiled, a genuine one this time, as she swiftly unzipped her hiking pants to reveal the swimsuit she had on underneath. The lake looked inviting, its surface sparkling under the sun, and a swim on such a warm day seemed like precisely what we needed to shake off the lingering unease. I changed quickly, pulling on my swim trunks, and waded into the surprisingly cold water with her. The initial shock of the chill momentarily made me forget my worries. Washing them away with the cold current, Bear, meanwhile, walked back and forth along the edge of the lake, an uncharacteristic unease in his gait. He normally adored water, relishing a good splash, but today he wouldn't come in with us. He sat at the very edge, his ears pricked, his eyes constantly scanning the dense tree line behind us. "What's up with him today?" Alara asked, floating on her back near me, her voice light with amusement. "He's being so clingy. It's cute, but weird for him." I shrugged, not wanting to admit that his behavior only reinforced my growing concerns. "Maybe he's just tired from yesterday's hike," I offered, a flimsy explanation. We swam for nearly an hour, the cool water refreshing after the hot hike. Alara seemed completely at ease, laughing and splashing like we were on any normal camping trip, utterly free of worries. I tried to join in, to feel as relaxed and unburdened as we had when we first arrived, but a persistent part of me remained on high alert, constantly scanning the shores, my eyes tracing the dark edge of the forest beyond, searching for something after swimming. We dried off on a large, flat rock that jutted out over the water, warmed by the sun. Alara unpacked the lunch we brought, simple, delicious sandwiches and juicy fruit, while I kept watch, trying not to be obvious about it. "This is exactly what I needed," Alara said, leaning back on her elbows, her face tilted toward the sun, soaking in its warmth. "No hospital, no emergencies, just this, pure bliss." I nodded, taking a bite of my sandwich, but my appetite was oddly absent, my stomach still a knot of anxiety. Bear sat between us, accepting small pieces of turkey I slipped him, but even though he looked relaxed, his ears perked up now and then when he caught a sound in the distance, a sound that registered only with him. "What time is it?" I asked suddenly, a sense of urgency prickling me as I noticed the sun's position, already starting its slow descent. Alara checked her watch. "Almost 2, why? Just thinking about heading back soon," I tried to sound casual. "It'll take an hour to get back to camp, and I want to have time to get dinner going before dark. Don't want to be setting up in pitch black." "We've got plenty of time, silly," Alara said, but she started packing up our things anyway, ever practical. The days are long this time of year. As we got ready to leave, my mind raced, contemplating how long it would take us to pack up our entire campsite if we needed to make a quick, panicked exit. The thought of spending another night in that flimsy tent, with those chilling clicking sounds circling us in the darkness, made my stomach clench with an icy grip. The hike back seemed quicker. Our muscles warmed up from the morning trek and the swim. As our campsite came into view, nestled among the pines, I slowed my pace, my eyes sweeping over the clearing, searching for anything out of place. Everything looked normal. Our tent stood undisturbed, its nylon fabric catching the gentle afternoon light. The camp chairs were positioned exactly where we'd left them, the blackened remains of last night's fire cold and still in the stone circle. Bear hesitated at the very edge of the clearing, his body tense, requiring a gentle tug on his leash to follow us in. "You know," I said, setting down my backpack, the words forming almost before I consciously thought them, "I was thinking, maybe we should pack up everything right now and drive to a hotel tonight. Find some place with real beds." Alara turned to me, surprise clear on her face, her brows raised. "A hotel? Caleb, why would we do that, after we hiked all the way out here and spent all that time setting up?" "The tent was really warm last night," I offered lamely, an obvious, transparent excuse. "I barely slept. Might be nice to have air conditioning, a real shower, you know." "Since when do you bail on camping because it's a little warm?" Alara laughed, but her eyes, usually so direct, narrowed slightly, a hint of suspicion entering them. "We've been planning this trip for months. What's really going on, Caleb?" I considered telling her everything. How the clicking sounds had circled our camp for hours, how weirdly quiet the air had felt, how something just felt profoundly, unnervingly off about these woods. But the skepticism, though mild in her eyes, stopped me. She already thought I was being paranoid about normal forest sounds. She might think I was losing my mind. "Nothing," I said finally, forcing a nonchalant shrug. "You're right, just a passing thought. Must be more tired than I thought." Alara studied me for a long moment, her gaze piercing, as if trying to read my unspoken thoughts. Then she shrugged, letting it go, though I knew she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, let's get dinner started then. I'm starving after all that swimming." The sun began its slow, inevitable descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. I built a new fire, larger than the one from the night before, wanting the comfort of its light and heat as a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. Alara prepared a foil packet of fresh vegetables and pre-seasoned chicken, ready to cook over the flames. I found myself constantly looking up, checking the tree line, listening intently for anything unusual, anything beyond the normal, comforting sounds of the forest settling into evening. "You're jumpy today, love," Alara observed, a note of gentle concern in her voice as she handed me a cup of wine. "Still thinking about those clicking sounds, aren't you? Just being cautious," I replied, taking a long sip of the wine. The liquid did nothing to calm the tight knot of nerves in my stomach. Dinner was incredibly good, perfectly cooked chicken and tasty, smoky vegetables, but I barely registered what I was eating, my attention constantly drawn to the encroaching shadows. As it grew dark, my anxiety intensified, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I added more wood to the fire, making it bigger than we needed, the flames leaping high. I told myself the extra light would help keep away whatever had made those sounds, but deep down, I knew it was a futile gesture, a child's attempt to ward off monsters with a nightlight. Alara yawned around 9 o'clock. "Ready for bed?" I nodded, too afraid to speak, knowing that if I did, my voice would betray the tremor of fear that ran through me. Inside the tent, I placed my hunting knife close by, under the edge of my sleeping bag, its cool metal a small comfort. Alara changed into her pajamas and slipped into our shared sleeping bag, her body a comforting warmth beside me. Bear lay at our feet, his body stiff, his eyes wide and alert even in the dim light of the tent. "Caleb," Alara murmured, kissing my cheek before settling in. "Alara," I whispered back, knowing with absolute certainty that sleep would be impossible for me. I lay there, utterly rigid, listening to Alara's breathing gradually deepen as she slipped into the oblivion of sleep. The forest outside seemed, at first, entirely normal. Crickets chirped their nightly chorus, a distant owl hooted its mournful call, and the occasional rustle of unseen night animals moved through the bushes. I looked at my watch. 11:23 p.m. hours to go before the dreaded 3 a.m. mark. I must have finally drifted off, despite my resolve to stay awake, because I suddenly jolted awake when everything went completely silent. The crickets had stopped, the night birds were silent. Even the soft whisper of wind through the pines had ceased. I checked my watch again. 1:58 a.m. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, pierced through me. Then it started. Click, click. Click, the same hollow, empty sound from the night before, but closer now, so much closer. I sat up slowly, carefully, not wanting to wake Alara, not wanting to share this chilling new reality until it was absolutely necessary. Bear was already awake, his eyes catching the faint moonlight filtering through the tent mesh, glinting with a primal, intense awareness. His body was stiff, his head slightly raised, focused on the tent wall. Click, 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 pause, click. Unlike last night when the sounds had started from a distance, these came from right outside our tent walls. So near that I thought, for a terrifying moment, if I pressed my hand against the thin nylon, I might actually touch whatever was making them. Alara stirred beside me, a soft moan escaping her lips, her eyes fluttering open. "Caleb," she mumbled, still half asleep, her voice thick with slumber. "SHH," I whispered, placing a hand on her arm, a silent plea for silence. Click, 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 click. Sarah sat up quickly, now fully, terrifyingly awake, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a thread of pure terror running through it. I put a finger to my lips, then pointed to the tent wall just inches from us. The clicking continued, moving slowly, methodically, deliberately around our tent, a chilling circumnavigation. Bear had begun a low, continuous growl, a deep, vibrating rumble in his chest, his fur standing up along his spine, his teeth bared in a silent, primal snarl aimed at the unseen threat. Alara grabbed my arm, squeezing hard, her fingers digging into my bicep, her nails biting into my skin. "What makes a sound like that, Caleb?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unwilling to speak. The clicking patterns had changed from previous nights. They were more complex now, with different rhythms, varied tones, and intricate sequences. Sometimes quick, rapid clusters of clicks, sometimes slower, more careful, deliberate patterns with unsettling pauses between them. It reminded me chillingly of Morse code or some other sophisticated form of communication, a conversation being held just outside our flimsy shelter. Click. Click, pause, click, 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 pause. Click. The pattern repeated, then subtly changed, as if a question had been asked and was now awaiting a response. Alara pressed herself against me, her body trembling uncontrollably, her fear palpable. "There's more than one," she whispered, her breath ghosting my ear. She was right. I could clearly hear the clicking coming from several directions at once, not echoes, but distinct, separate sources, as if multiple entities were surrounding our tent, conversing with each other through those weird, alien clicks. I figured there were at least 3 separate creatures circling us, maybe more. Bear's growl deepened, growing louder, and I reached out to place a reassuring, yet cautionary hand on his back, feeling how rigid and tense his powerful muscles were. I was afraid his growling might anger whatever was out there, might draw their attention more directly, or worse, wake Alara completely and cause her to make a sound, a scream. But I couldn't bring myself to quiet him. His unwavering, primal warning was the only defense we had, the only buffer against the unknown. "The camera," I mouthed to Alara, pointing to the GoPro I'd set up earlier. She nodded, understanding instantly. The camera was recording everything, both the chilling sounds and, hopefully, whatever might be visible through the tent's mesh windows or pressed against the fabric. It was our only hope of understanding what we were dealing with for over 4 agonizing hours. We sat frozen in place, barely breathing, our bodies rigid with fear, as the clicking continued its maddening, alien patterns around our tent. Sometimes the sounds would stop completely for several minutes, plunging us into an agonizing, suffocating silence, making us incredibly tense, our nerves stretched taut. Then they would resume just as suddenly, often from a completely different position than before, closer, more intimate. Alara kept a death grip on my arm the entire time, her body trembling with exhaustion and primal fear. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The shared, profound terror was communication enough. Around 4:30 am, the clicking patterns changed again, becoming more frantic, more overlapping, a rapid-fire torrent of clicks that sounded almost like an argument, or a heated, agitated discussion among the unseen entities outside. Bear's growling grew stronger in response, a fierce, protective rumble, his body tensing, ready to spring, ready to attack if needed. I held the knife tightly, its cool weight a small comfort, preparing myself for the worst. For the tent fabric to tear open, for something to reach inside, for a breach of our flimsy sanctuary. My muscles ached from being held tense for so long, every fiber screaming in protest, but adrenaline coursed through my veins, keeping me hyper-alert, every sense sharpened, even though I was bone-weary. Alara had her phone clutched in her other hand, thumb poised over the emergency call button. We both knew it was utterly pointless. We were miles from the nearest road, deep in the wilderness, and help, if it even came, would take hours to reach us. But the futile gesture, the mere possibility of assistance, seemed to give her some small, desperate comfort. The clicking continued unabated, a relentless, unsettling soundtrack to our terror, until the first, faintest hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, painting the mesh window in hues of pale gray. As the impenetrable darkness began to recede, as the first rays of light touched the forest, the sounds gradually moved farther away from our tent, becoming softer, more distant, as if retreating from the coming light, unwilling to be exposed. By 5:45 am, as the forest began to fill with the familiar, comforting chorus of early morning bird song, the clicking stopped completely. Neither of us moved for a long, long time, unable to quite believe it was truly over. Bear finally relaxed his stance, slumping down with an exhausted sigh, his golden fur a warm, reassuring presence. Alara released her grip on my arm, leaving deep red marks where her fingers had dug into her skin, testament to her terror. "They're gone," I whispered, my voice hoarse from hours of fearful silence. Alara nodded, tears streaming down her face, leaving glistening trails on her cheeks. "What were they, Caleb?" she asked, the question barely audible, a raw, primal whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, my own voice still a raspy rasp. "But we've got it on camera. We'll know, finally." With shaking hands, my fingers feeling clumsy and numb from exhaustion and lingering fear, I reached for the GoPro, disconnecting it from its power bank and turning it toward us. Alara wiped her tears away with the back of her hand, leaning in close, her face still pale and streaked with moisture, as I navigated to the video playback function. I scrolled through the footage, starting from when we'd gone to bed, hours of nothing but us lying in our sleeping bags, occasionally changing positions, bare a soft lump at the foot of the tent. I fast-forwarded through it, a blur of mundane tent life, until I reached the 2 a.m. mark, precisely when the clicking had begun. The audio picked up the sounds clearly, sickeningly clear, those hollow, empty clicks that had surrounded us all night, that chilling, intelligent conversation. I continued skimming through the footage, watching the timestamp in the corner, holding my breath, dreading what I knew was coming. "Stop," Alara said suddenly, her voice sharp, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "Go back." I saw something. I rewound the footage, slowly, frame by agonizing frame, to around 3:40 a.m., then played it at normal speed. For a full minute, nothing happened beyond the incessant clicking sounds and occasional, blurry glimpses of Bear sitting, alert at the bottom of the frame, his eyes fixed on the tent entrance. Then at exactly 3:42 a.m., something appeared in the frame. A face. I froze, a primal terror gripping me, freezing the breath in my lungs. The image was blurry, grainy with the low light and the camera's infrared, but it was undeniably, horrifyingly visible. A long, white face pressed against the mesh window of our tent, just inches from the camera lens. It had something sticking out where a nose and mouth should be, something that vaguely resembled a beak, but it wasn't a beak. It was a protrusion, a sort of snout-like appendage that tapered to a point, its surface strangely textured. But its eyes, God, its eyes made me feel profoundly sick to my stomach. They were bulging, unnervingly large, and completely, starkly white, reflecting the camera's infrared light so they shone with an unnatural, luminous glow in the impenetrable darkness. They were unblinking, utterly alien. The creature seemed to be watching us as we slept, its head tilted weirdly, unnaturally, as if studying us, observing our patterns. It stayed perfectly, disturbingly still for nearly 30 seconds, those luminous white eyes fixed on our sleeping forms, before slowly, deliberately backing away from the window and disappearing into the blackness beyond the tent. Alara screamed then, a guttural sound tearing from her throat, raw and visceral, and she dropped the camera, scrambling backward until she hit the far wall of the tent, pressing herself against it as if trying to merge with the fabric. What the hell was that, Caleb?" she yelled, her voice thick with terror and disbelief. I couldn't answer. I was too stunned, too terrified to speak, my own throat constricted by an icy grip. I picked up the camera, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it again, and rewound the footage, forcing myself to look more closely at the thing that had been watching us, studying us, while we lay vulnerable inside our tent. Its skin was indeed pale, almost pure white, and had a weird, unsettling texture, kind of like feathers, but not exactly, not truly. More like an incredibly fine, downy fuzz over scaled skin, subtly rippling. The beak-like thing wasn't truly a bird's beak. It looked more like the mouth and nose had been elongated, pulled forward, almost stretched into an unnatural point. And those eyes, those terrible, unblinking white eyes, they didn't blink once. Not a single flicker during the entire time it watched us. "We need to leave," Alara said, her voice strained but firm, already grabbing her backpack, her movements frantic. "Now, right now, we can't stay here another minute." I nodded, unable to find words, my mind reeling. The creature on the camera had confirmed every single fear I'd been trying to rationalize away, every unsettling sensation I'd been suppressing since the first night we heard those clicking sounds. Something unnatural was in these woods, something that defied all logic and known biology. Something that had been watching us, studying us, circling our camp each night, observing us with an alien, chilling curiosity. Alara moved with a desperate, frantic energy, rolling up our sleeping bags and stuffing them into their compression sacks without bothering to fold them properly, her hands fumbling in her haste. I began gathering our clothes and personal items, shoving them messily into my backpack, my own movements jerky and imprecise. "Bear needs to go out," I said suddenly, remembering our dog hadn't been outside since before bed. He was standing by the tent door, looking incredibly uncomfortable, his tail tucked low. "Can't it wait until we're packed?" Alara asked, her hands shaking as she tried to collapse our small camping lantern, its plastic casing rattling against itself. "I don't think so," I replied, looking at Bear's anxious, desperate posture, his pleading eyes. I'll take him out quickly while you finish packing the sleeping gear. Just stay in here." Alara nodded, though I could tell she didn't like the idea of us separating, even briefly. "Be careful, Caleb," she said, her voice tight with fear. I unzipped the tent door, knife still in hand, its cool metal a small comfort, and stepped out with Bear. The early morning light filtered through the canopy, painting our campsite in a soft, ethereal glow. It looked utterly normal, deceptively peaceful. Birds were already singing their morning songs, and a light mist covered the ground, clinging to the pine needles. Bear immediately trotted to the edge of our campsite to relieve himself, but instead of finishing quickly like he usually did, he suddenly stopped. His whole body went stiff, his head raised, staring hard toward the trees on the far side of our clearing, the hair on his back rising again. I looked where he was looking, straining to see through the morning mist, which seemed to cling more densely in that particular area. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the dark, familiar silhouettes of the pine trees fading into the distance. Then I caught a fleeting flash of movement, about 50 yards away, something pale, moving quickly between the distant trees, almost dissolving into the mist. It was there for just a second, a flicker of that unsettling white, then gone, disappearing as swiftly as it had appeared. It moved in a way that terrified me, a jerky, unnatural motion, like a marionette being pulled by unseen strings. I grabbed Bear's collar and pulled him back to the tent, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We need to leave right now, Alara," I told her as I zipped the tent closed behind us, my voice raspy with urgency. "There's something out there. I saw it moving in the trees." "It's here." Alara's face turned even paler, but she nodded, now fully believing everything I'd been saying, her last shred of skepticism obliterated by the horror of the camera footage and my own desperate tone. "I'm almost done," she said, stuffing the last of our personal items into her backpack, her movements mechanical, desperate. We worked in silent panic, grabbing only what we absolutely needed, leaving behind anything we could live without. Our camp stove, the extra food, even our camp chairs, all abandoned, deemed non-essential to our survival. We stuffed our backpacks with only the most necessary items, lightweight and crucial. I grabbed our tent poles with shaking hands and yanked them apart, not caring if I damaged them in the process. The tent collapsed around us as we worked, a flimsy, useless heap of nylon. Alara was shoving water bottles and energy bars into her backpack, her movements jerky and desperate. "Leave the stove," I said, my voice hoarse from hours of fearful silence. "And the chairs, just grab what we need to get out of here. Nothing else matters." Alara nodded without argument, sweat beading on her forehead even in the cool morning air. Neither of us had slept properly in 2 days. She looked utterly exhausted, her eyes sunken. I probably looked just as bad or worse. Bear walked back and forth at the edge of our collapsed camp, his eyes fixed on the trees where I'd seen that weird white thing moving a minute ago. He kept looking back at us, his eyes wide and pleading, as if begging us to hurry up. I stuffed our sleeping bags into their compression sacks, the GoPro going into an outside pocket of my backpack. I needed to keep that scary footage, to have it as proof, but a chilling thought crossed my mind. "Who would even believe us, Caleb?" Alara whispered, freezing in place, her hand reaching out to grasp my arm. "Listen." I stopped, holding my breath, straining my ears. At first I heard nothing unusual, just the normal chorus of birds welcoming the morning and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Then it came. Unmistakable, even in broad daylight. Click, click, click. "No," I breathed, dropping the tent stuff sack I was holding, my voice a desperate plea. "Not now." The clicking sounds, which we had only heard at night, shrouded by darkness, were back, but this time they were in broad daylight. This broke whatever rules these things had been following, whatever boundaries they had observed, and that terrified me more than anything else so far. If they were no longer confined to the darkness, if they could move freely in the light, then we had no safe haven. Bear erupted into frantic barking, a fierce, guttural sound, lunging toward the forest edge with his teeth bared, his entire body a taut coil of aggression. Alara screamed, a sharp, piercing sound, and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over our half-packed supplies. "Get behind me," I said, pulling the hunting knife from my pocket, its blade glinting dully in the morning light, and stepping forward, placing myself between Alara and the source of the sound. The clicking got louder, coming from a spot in the trees directly across from us, just beyond our clearing. Bear's barks got more aggressive, more desperate, as he stood ready, a living shield, prepared to attack whatever emerged. Then the trees opened up, and a man walked into our clearing. He had on a park ranger uniform, complete with a wide-brimmed hat that shaded most of his face. He looked middle-aged, of average height, with a nameplate pinned to his pocket that read Wilson. At first glance, everything about him seemed normal. Utterly conventionally normal. "Good morning, folks," he called, raising a hand in greeting, his voice pleasant, seemingly reassuring. "Everything okay over here?" Heard some commotion. I stared at him, my knife still clutched at my side, concealed from his view, my blood turning to ice. Something was wrong, very, very wrong. It took me a moment, my fear-addled brain struggling to process what I was seeing, but then it hit me. His lips didn't match his words. The way his mouth moved was subtly delayed, slightly out of sync, as if I was watching a poorly dubbed foreign film, the audio track lagging behind the visual. "We're fine," I called back, my voice tight, forcing it out. "Just packing up to leave, actually, heading out." The ranger stepped closer, and as he did, I noticed more details, tiny, insidious anomalies that made me freeze, that sent a fresh wave of primal dread through me. He walked with perfectly even steps, too measured, too consistent, too unnaturally smooth for natural human movement. When he turned his head to look around our campsite, the motion was fluid, almost liquid, too smooth, lacking the small, almost imperceptible jerks and pauses of normal human head movement. It was like a camera on a perfect gimbal. "I'm Ranger Wilson from the Allegheny National Forest Service," he said, his voice pleasantly neutral, yet with an odd, almost imperceptible flanging quality, like two slightly out-of-sync versions of the same voice playing simultaneously, creating a subtle, unsettling waver. "I'm patrolling for illegal campers and checking on hikers. We've had some bear sightings in the area recently. Just safety concerns, you understand." As he came closer, I saw his eyes. And that's when my blood ran cold, solidifying in my veins. They were too wide, too white. Exactly like the bulging, luminous white eyes I'd seen on the camera footage, shining in the darkness. Human in appearance, yes, but somehow profoundly, deeply wrong. They didn't blink. Not once bear, sensing the escalating threat, wouldn't stop barking. His body shook with aggressive fury, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest. He pulled against my grip on his collar, desperate to get between us and the approaching ranger. "Our dog doesn't usually react this way," Alara said nervously, a forced, desperate smile plastered on her face. "He's normally very friendly." The ranger smiled back, a perfect, uncreased smile, but the expression didn't reach his eyes, which remained wide, unblinking, devoid of warmth or empathy. "Dogs can sense bears in the area before humans can," he said, his voice still that unsettling double tone. "That might be what's bothering him." Another detail hit me, stark and clear. His uniform was too clean, impossibly clean. No dirt, no sweat stains, not even a single wrinkle. No real ranger working these woods day in and day out would look that tidy, that pristine. "May I see your camping permit?" he asked, stopping about 10 feet from us, a polite, yet utterly unyielding command in his voice. All overnight stays require proper registration. Alara started to reach for her backpack, where our crumpled permit was stored. "Of course, I have it right here. Actually," I interrupted, my voice tight, cutting her off, pulling her close to me. "We're just about to head out. We've been here 2 nights already. Decided to pack it in early." "Still need to verify your permit," the ranger insisted, taking another measured, too smooth step toward us. "Would be easier if you came back to my station. It's not far from here." Alara, ever compliant, nodded, setting her backpack down. "Oh sure, if that's..." I grabbed her arm, pulling her body flush against mine, my lips barely moving, my voice a desperate whisper. "Something's wrong, Alara. Look at his eyes. Look how his mouth moves when he talks." She stared at the ranger for a long moment, her eyes wide, and I saw the shock. The dawning horror spread across her face as she finally registered the subtle, terrifying anomalies, as she realized what was truly happening. She took a distinct step backward, pressing against me, her body trembling anew. The ranger, or whatever it was wearing the ranger's appearance, tilted his head as he watched us, whisper. An unnerving, deliberate motion. The movement was weird, the angle impossible for human anatomy. His head turned nearly 90 degrees, like an owl observing its next meal, its white eyes fixed on us with an unsettling intensity. "There a problem?" he asked, and this time, the disconnect between his voice and mouth movements was even more pronounced, more disturbing. His lips moved several seconds after the words were already hanging in the air between us, a grotesque, delayed mimicry. "No problem," I said slowly, forcing a casualness I didn't feel, beginning to move subtly toward our packs to grab them. We just need to finish packing before we go anywhere. The thing wearing the ranger's appearance stared at us, its head still tilted at that impossible angle, its unblinking white eyes fixed on us. Then, something changed in its expression. A subtle yet horrifying flattening. A loss of the fragile human effect it had been attempting to maintain. The polite smile wavered, the features subtly rippled. "You must come with me," it said, but the words deteriorated midway through the sentence, crumbling into a series of those familiar, chilling clicks, hollow and empty, before slowly, sickeningly forming back into broken English. "Station safe there." Alara screamed then, a guttural sound tearing from her throat, raw and visceral, and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over our half-packed supplies. "Car keys." I hissed at Alara, never taking my eyes off the creature, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "Get the car keys from my pack. Now." She dug frantically through the side pocket of my backpack, her hands shaking so badly she fumbled them twice before finally pulling out the keys. The ranger thing took another step toward us, its movements suddenly jerky, disjointed, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. "Stay," it said, its voice now a strange, terrifying mix of human speech and hollow, resonant clicks, overlapping and intertwining, the language of the forest. "Must examine, must study," I shouted, grabbing Bear's leash in one hand and Alara's arm in the other. "Now," we ran. I grabbed my backpack, the one with the GoPro, as we bolted, leaving everything else behind: the tent, the stove, the remaining food, the chairs, the memories of a peaceful trip shattered by grotesque reality. We crashed through the bushes, abandoning the faint trail in favor of the most direct, desperate route back to the parking area. Behind us, I heard something moving through the forest with unnatural speed, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but no heavy footfalls like a human would make. It was lighter, faster, an impossible movement. "Look back," I gasped to Alara as we ran, my lungs burning, the air searing my throat. "Just keep going, don't stop." Bear pulled ahead on his leash, his powerful legs pumping, leading us through the dense woods as if he knew exactly where to go, a primal instinct guiding him to safety. My lungs burned, searing with every ragged breath, and my legs felt like rubber after 2 nights without sleep. But terror, cold and sharp, kept me moving forward, pushing past the pain, past the exhaustion. Alara raced beside me, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps, her hands still clutched in mine. The sounds behind us grew closer, distinct. Whatever was chasing us moved faster than any human could, especially through thick, unforgiving forest click. Click, click. The sounds broke up the chase, getting louder with each passing second, closer, closer after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes of desperate, agonizing running. The trees began to thin. The gravel parking area came into view ahead, our car sitting alone where we'd left it 3 days ago, a beacon of hope in the terrifying wilderness. "Almost there," I panted, pushing my exhausted body to its absolute limit, my legs screaming in protest. Just as we burst from the tree line into the parking lot, something crashed through the brush behind us, a violent tearing of branches. I couldn't help it. I glanced back. The ranger uniform was splitting at the seams, tearing along the arms and chest. Pale, unnaturally white flesh with that odd, feather-like texture pushed through the rips. The thing's face was half human, half something else, something unspeakably alien. The skin was pulling back from its jaw, exposing a horrifying beak-like structure underneath, wet and glistening. Those white, bulging eyes, utterly unblinking, stared at us with the cold, predatory intensity of a hunter. It moved toward us, not running, but with a jerky, bird-like walk, impossibly fast, its limbs bending at strange, unnatural angles. Alara fumbled with the car keys at the door, her hands shaking too badly to hit the unlock button. I snatched them from her and pressed the button, hearing the satisfying, blessed click of the locks opening. I yanked the back door open first, practically throwing Bear inside, pushing him in with a desperate shove. Then I rushed to the driver's side as Alara scrambled into the passenger seat, slamming her door shut. The engine roared to life as I turned the key, the sound a symphony of salvation. Through the windshield, I saw the creature emerge fully from the trees, now barely looking like the ranger it had pretended to be, its human disguise shredded. It moved toward us way too fast, its movements a disturbing, disjointed dance of angles and unnatural twists. I slammed the car into reverse, then into drive, tires spinning wildly on the loose dirt of the parking lot as we lurched backward. The wheels caught grip, throwing up a cloud of dust, and we shot forward toward the narrow access road that would take us out of the forest, away from this living nightmare. As we sped away, I dared a quick glance in the rearview mirror. Standing in the middle of the dirt road, unmoving, was the pale, bird-like creature. Its body was humanoid, yes, but wrong. Too thin, too gangly, its joints bent at weird, impossible angles. The head was long, tapered, with that beak-like protrusion where a human mouth and nose would be. And those horrible, bulging white eyes stared after us without blinking, fixed on our retreating vehicle. It didn't chase us as we drove away. It just watched, its head tilted at that impossible angle, getting smaller and smaller in my mirror until we rounded a bend in the winding forest road, and it disappeared from view. Alara was sobbing beside me, her whole body shaking uncontrollably, deep, wrenching sobs racking her frame. In the back seat, Bear whined, a low, terrified sound, and pressed himself as far as he could against the opposite door, as far from the forest side of the car as he could possibly get. "Did you see it, Caleb?" she asked between sobs, her voice raw, fractured by terror. "Did you see what it really was?" "I saw it, Alara," I confirmed, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my knuckles aching. We didn't speak again, not a single word, until we reached the main highway, putting miles and miles of asphalt between ourselves and the Allegheny National Forest, between us and the things that lurked within its ancient, terrifying depths. The morning sun, now high in the sky, felt like a physical blessing on my skin through the car window, grounding me, pulling me back to a reality where creatures with clicking voices and unblinking white eyes didn't exist. "Never again," Alara finally said, her voice raw from crying but firm. "I'm never going camping again, not a single night, not anywhere." "Never," I agreed, pressing the accelerator harder, the speed a desperate attempt to outrun the memories, the images burned into my mind. "Not in a million years." What was the most chilling detail in this story for you? Let me know in the comments.